All right. Yep, there are a few things on the agenda. Please add anything else that you guys want to talk about. Um, yeah, so I guess the first item is just a couple Ceph ADM things. I noticed that I had to change the list networks in order to make the subnet stuff work properly. Did that merge? I think that might have already merged actually. Um, but it seems like it overlaps with the gather facts command, and it feels like those should just be merged. But I'm not sure if anybody knows what the history of those was and why they were separate, or if there's any reason not to just pull them together.
But what is the problem that GatherFax is providing the same information, or
It's providing similar information. So list networks originally would tell you all the subnets and then which IP addresses. It was a dictionary of subnet to a list of IPs that are on the host. It was used by the code for the monitor to pick monitor IPs, and I extended that for that networks command. Also used it for that. And I had to make a change to it for this is what it was for the virtual IP service for Keep Alive D. I changed it so that it also includes the interface name, the like ETH0 or whatever it is, in there. And when I was looking at the code, I realized that GatherFax is gathering similar information, but not quite. It lists the interfaces, and then it lists one IPv4 address and one IPv6 address. So it's like kind of squished in a way that throws away a bunch of information. But it's similar, but it's not actually what I needed also. But it just seems weird to have two, whatever. It seems like we should just collapse those two and
yeah,
yeah.
Yeah, I agree with that. But
Sure
what is your thoughts to put the list networks functionality inside the GatherFax?
Probably, yeah. I mean, as long as I didn't look at closely at what GatherFax is gathering, but as long as it's nothing that's like slow to gather, then I think we should just do it all together.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it'll
So what?
simplify stuff. Okay. And then the other one was the HA proxy VIP stuff. So I think the main thing that I ran into when I stopped working on it was, I guess first I had a conversation with Patrick and Varsha about CephFS and NFS, and they had questions about how to make. They had a question about NFS because when they were killing the NFS daemon, it would restart, or maybe not restart, but sometimes it might get scheduled on another machine, and that would change its IP. And then they're like, "How do we make this work?" And so I mentioned that the virtual IP thing would be perfect for this because you could just move the IP around and it would follow the NFS gateway, and they were excited about that. And so I think and they need that for downstream also. So I think that's probably the next use case after RGW to focus on and make sure it works. The main gap in the pull request that I have right now is that if you have, say you have an RGW service that has a bunch of daemons on a bunch of nodes, there's an HA proxy service that can go anywhere because it's actually redirecting traffic. But the virtual IP service has to be on the same nodes as whatever the service is that it's fronting. And the Keep Live D configuration, in fact, usually is probing for like a particular port on localhost. So somehow we need to make sure that the virtual IP service is on the same nodes as whatever it is that you're fronting. Yeah. So whether it's NFS or whether it's HA proxy or whether it's RGW directly, like it needs to map back to that service. And so you could do that explicitly now by like labeling nodes and then scheduling both of them having the same placement spec. But I was thinking that in sort of the out of the box case, you might have just like 8 nodes and you don't care where anything runs. You don't care where the virtual IP is. You just want it to work. You don't want to have to label nodes or anything like that. And so I was going to extend the placement spec to have a property called match service hosts, and then a different service name. And so you could say that the virtual IP service would just be placed on whatever a different service is, whether it's the NFS gateway or whatever it is. And then when it goes and it does the apply, it'll just look at the host and it'll just match it up. So I'm like partway through doing that.
Yeah.
And I think
That,
so, yeah.
One question is because well you are trying to create a independent service that is going to be keep alive, okay, or virtual IP service
Hmm.
in order to apply this service to other services.
Yeah.
Maybe another approach maybe is to to hide the virtual IP service inside the other services. For example,
Yeah.
to have another attribute in the service just to say, I want a virtual IP for this service. And if you press this, you set this attribute, then a part of the normal daemon of this service deploy a keep alive daemon in the same host providing the virtual IP for the daemon. Maybe
Yeah.
I think that this match that I think that is more is going to be more easy to configure for the final user, and probably we are going to avoid it's going to be a little bit more complicated because we are going to have exactly the same kind of problems that we have with HA for RGW, because you are deploying a couple of different daemons
Yeah.
in each service for each host. But in any case, I think that it could be nice, well, to keep the configuration
Simple.
simple, okay, with this kind of approach. I think that to use the other approach maybe is more easy to implement, okay, but it's going to be more difficult to understand for the final user.
Yep. 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 I kind of agree, which is why the other reason why I sort of paused. I wanted to get Sebastian's input on this and see what his
Yeah,
view. Um, but I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. I'm kind of ambivalent because I think for HA proxy, it makes a lot of sense to have it separable because it can manage a bunch of different stuff. And you have to control where HA proxy runs independent of the other service that you're proxying and so on. Um, but so yeah, I don't know. I don't know. I'm not sure.
maybe for HA proxy could be well, better to have an independent service, but for the virtual IP, I think that probably the best decision is, well, I like more to include an attribute inside the services that we want to have with a virtual IP.
Yeah, yeah, that might make sense. And we can probably figure out a way to avoid any code duplication to make that work. It'll just be a little bit weird.
Okay.
Okay. Well, I'll hold off on that. I mean, because if we do that, then we don't need the that place and spec matches thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. There's something here. CS Quincy. Try to document that. Yes. Okay. So we want to create a roadmap for dashboard for Quincy, and we want to schedule a session during CDS to do that.
Yeah,
Yeah. Let me
yeah,
put the.
yeah. I put this because I see that in Quincy we have for the orchestrator on April 7. There is the orchestrator meeting, and I don't know if in that session sometime will be allocated in order to talk about the sync with the dashboard. I think that last year we did a document setting priorities for orchestrator and dashboard in order to have in sync the both modules, both packages. And I don't know if you have set up already a roadmap or are yet to be discussed, and then evaluate the impact or the side effects that can have in the dashboard to better integrate, to better provide a clear roadmap on how to integrate both tools.
Yeah, I don't think we have.
But
I see it on you put it on the dashboard meeting agenda. Um, Can we talk about it
Yeah,
there?
I
But
have
but let
put.
me can I just add something? I mean, from the point
Yeah,
of
yeah.
view of dashboard, and we have dashboard, and some things will go through Orchestrator, some things will go directly to components, right? So how do we get all of those component requirements together? I mean, who is responsible for that, and how do we drive that, right? I mean, for instance, as we break down some of the things recently, we've been making changes. Does that force us now to go to components versus going directly to Orchestrator? In some of the multi-site things we just changed. I mean, so if we do, we go directly to the components. How do we make sure we get the representation? And we have a bunch of components, right? So I mean, you see where I'm
Yeah.
going?
Yeah, I mean, I almost wonder if we should just make sure that dashboard is part of the discussion of all of these other in all these meetings. I mean, you're talking about the planning portion of this, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
Because in general, I mean, let me ask a silly question from the point of view of the component, all the component discussions upstream, and I can't go to all of them, right? So, but in general, do they talk about the CLI needs, which is one aspect of management, if they do, then, dashboard should be a part of every discussion as well, right? I mean, in a way,
Yeah. Yeah, I
if we
mean,
want to be successful, I mean,
yeah. I think the problem is that by default the CLI is part of the discussion implicitly because that's what the developers use and that's what they
yeah.
test with and everything. And I think the developers aren't using the dashboard.
How do we change that?
Yeah, exactly. I don't know. Yeah.
We need people to show that the value, and
Yeah.
maybe you could start Sage.
Yeah, exactly. Well, you know what might be helpful? I mean, here's an idea. If we just go into if during each of these subsections, like we put a quick session at the beginning that just like goes through what the dashboard currently does, and talk about what the obvious gaps are.
That'd be great. I mean, that'd be
Because I
awesome.
think a lot of developers like aren't even familiar with what the current coverage is. So it's hard to like
But
know
so so,
what
so let me ask a silly question then, from the point of view of then, if we put it in each of the component sections, then we would need someone from the dashboard team at every single one then, right? So it's like, so we'll have to distribute our team across, make sure we get full coverage, have those
yeah,
discussions, then we could synthesize it, bring it back.
yeah, I think
Ouch.
so.
Okay. What
Well,
do
I
you
mean,
think?
I think it's, I mean, yeah, I think it'll be worth it to have like, I mean, if you just think about like the information that we want to convey, if we want to have people on the RGW team, for example, familiar with what the dashboard does,
Yeah.
like I think just spending 15 minutes and just doing a demo, like a walkthrough of all the stuff that it currently does, and then follow that up with a discussion of like what doesn't it do and what should come next. Like that seems
Yeah.
like a natural thing to include in each block, which is going to
Right.
take a little bit of preparation on the dashboard side just to like plan out what you're gonna. Maybe I don't know. Maybe not. Maybe it's pretty easy, but
Right. And then from the point of view of, what is plain and Quincy, which is different from a functionality perspective that needs management as well,
yeah,
so
yeah,
because I remember last year in one of the planning sessions, I went to a couple just because they were in my time zone and they were available, and there was no discussion on management. There was some CLI
yeah,
discussion, and it was like, yeah, so I went away last year thinking, damn, we're missing here, and
yeah,
so. And
yeah.
I would ask questions on the management, and it would be like, just sort of the conversation would stop. I don't know. They say, well, we don't know. It's like, okay, so maybe might be nice to drive that then. Okay. Alfonso, can we do that? Will we be able to scale?
You mean attending all the sessions, right? Yeah. We'll manage Ernesto and myself to attend to all possible or to coordinate between each other. Yeah. The
Well,
good thing
I think
here,
you can add in Paul, but Paul's, time zone makes it
yeah, the
difficult,
time zone is
depending
not
on, so
friendly. By the
I don't know if
way,
Juan Me can maybe drive the dashboard for a little bit too. What do you think, Juan Me?
Well, I am an enthusiastic of the dashboard, but I think that I'm not the best person to defend this. So,
by the
Eh, eh,
way, Sage,
Mm-hmm.
if you see April 8th, we put a dashboard meeting at 12, well, UTC, maybe it's too early for Pacific time. Do you want to allocate an extra mini meeting more Pacific time friendly?
For the dashboard.
Yeah.
Um,
I think if we are collecting in other sessions some conclusion, maybe we can
sure. Yeah.
make like a summary meeting about the main priorities for dashboard and other. The main problem is the dashboard is a traversal component, so any decision in other component can have an impact in
Yeah.
dashboard. So at least to have a clear understanding that the dashboard is the most fragile component, so let's be clear on how to avoid this gap and make it like consistent across all the components.
Yeah. Yeah. Sure.
Okay.
I mean, yeah. I think if you want to have a second like a specific dashboard thing, yeah, that just add it to the pad whenever you think makes sense. But it sounds to me like probably what's going to happen is that, and I think probably what's going to be most effective is if we include it like at the probably close to the top of all these other components. If we do like the dashboard summary and the discussion around it, and then hopefully that'll seed the rest of the discussion for the session to make sure people are thinking about the dashboard implications with other new features. Then that will get everybody else thinking about it. And then the actual dashboard session at the end is probably going to be mostly the dashboard team, like figuring out how to how it's all gonna come together. I guess.
Yeah, if we're to do that, we have the discipline for that for every single meeting. I think that would work great. And then we synthesize all those parts, and then we have a very limited team, unfortunately. So we're going to have to prioritize, the workflows we want to concentrate on and the management things we want to concentrate on, which are more important for the downstream, so we'll work on those first. And, so. Hey,
Yeah.
what is the uptake upstream of dashboard at this point? Is there a lot, or is it pretty limited?
I really don't know.
Okay.
There is a user survey, and it's almost wrapped up. And there were questions about the dashboard in there, but I haven't looked at them. So you can go look.
Okay.
Do
you have a link to that data? We could take a look as well. Just I'd be curious. Is that accessible to anybody, or
it's not public yet? Like
it's not public. Okay.
Yeah, I can log into Zoho and go look at it, but it'll be done. It'll be done shortly. I think
awesome.
The survey closes at the end of the month or something. So
excellent. Thank you.
I mean that is a good possibility, though. It might be that we want the telemetry to indicate like how often the dashboard was logged into and which pages were being used or something. That might be interesting information to report back for the future, so we know what.
That would be good.
Let me add that to the dashboard.
Do you try to make every single session, Sage, at those, or just or do you miss a few as well? I imagine it's tough.
I think last time around we didn't really do it this way, where we had like a whole bunch of separate meetings. There weren't that many, so it hasn't been a problem in the past. But I'm going to try to make all these.
Okay, awesome.
Yeah.
A busy week.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah.
And we have with Ernesto on vacation. It starts. Correct me if I'm wrong. It's like next Tuesday.
Well, he'll be back next week, right? Ernesto will be back.
Yeah, on Monday. On Monday, April 5th, Ernesto is back.
Yeah, but if we have to prep and everything, you're out Monday, so then it starts Tuesday. So we'll have to, maybe what we could do is concentrate. Maybe Alfonso, you could concentrate on the ones on Tuesday and make sure we're aware of what we need to show from the point of view of, the dashboard. Make sure we're ready, and then maybe, then we can when Ernesto comes back on Monday, he could pick up the following day or something if we could work it that way. So.
Yeah, no problem. On Tuesday, on April 5th, I'm out on Monday.
Yeah, that's why I said, we can plan.
On Tuesday, we can do a sync and then share all the knowledge and attend all the possible meetings.
Good.
Yeah, awesome. No worries on this.
Sorry, we took you off track of your orchestration meeting. I apologize.
Well, no, it's just about if somehow from the orchestrator team can create some document like this about it not has to not be called Ceph dashboard passive priorities. It can be Ceph orchestrator Quincy priorities. So we can other components check what's going on in the orchestrator and then bring about or bring up our concerns, topics, or comments there.
Okay, sorry, I got affected.
Yeah, at least, well, if you create finally the Etherpad, put it in the CDS Quincy so we can access to it. And if not, then we can discuss in the very meeting. But it could be useful.
Okay.
Okay. So
Okay.
there's nothing from my side. Yeah.
Okay. All right. All right, that's good. Okay. What else? RGW block in Bootstrap Ganesha config. What's this about?
So here the first PR is like in which the type part is removed from the NFS volumes interface basically. So that is one, and another is a related PR in which the RGW block was added to the Bootstrap Ganesha config, which is basically a bare minimum config which starts the NFS daemon. But now since RGW block is added, and on the Rook side it's not added. So one of the links actually shows the points out to the config in Rook side as well as on the Ceph ADM side. So there's a difference now. So I'm not sure why the RGW config block is required, because in my knowledge, it's not required for starting up a Ganesha daemon, but it is added and now it's causing a difference. And in future, that can cause issues maintaining both the configs on Rook as well as Ceph ADM side. And if we can add, if it is required, if we can add it to the higher, through the NFS plugin, volumes plugin, then that would be great because we have the type, cluster type in the interface. And also with dashboard, dashboard was initially very closely coupled with Rook, and dashboard did supports the RGW config as well. Sorry, RGW exports as well as FFS exports. So based on that, the other config which doesn't have the RGW config block also works for the RGW exports, I think. I haven't checked out the current status with Rook regarding the RGW export, but with CephFS it works both on the volume side and the dashboard side. But with these differences, that can cause an issue. And also, if we remove the type part, that can cause a backward compatibility issue for the volumes NFS interface.
Michael, are you there?
Yeah.
There you are. Yeah, okay. Tell your video was off.
Yeah.
Yep.
So one of the things I think there's like two parts to this though. Like we need a keyring with caps to the OSD, and that's necessary to access our GW. And so that's what this block and Ceph ADM is for. And I'm not sure just creating an export's not good enough for this. And so one of the beauties of doing this way is that we can deploy a single NFS service that supports both CephFS and RGW within a single instance. If we continue down the way that the volumes module is currently implemented, we'd have to stand up a cluster for CephFS and a cluster for RGW separately. And then I think the dashboard would need to be aware of that, which would be too complicated. I think that's less than ideal.
Is that what Rook is doing now? It's setting up two separate NFS?
It looks like Rook doesn't support it at all based on this config because it does, well, Rook is getting away with this because it's using the admin keyring. and so it actually doesn't need the RGW block. That's only required because CephADM is actually creating keyring with caps, proper caps, in this case. But in the rook case, I suspect creating an RGW export actually works just because they're tailing off the admin keyring. So they pretty much have all permissions.
So I'm I'm a little bit fuzzy here, but just to make sure I'm understanding, this config here that's being generated, this is the one that's pushed out as a file into the container inside the config, and it's just a bare minimum, and then the config blocks for actual exports are in Rados, and they get like sucked up by the daemon, and so that those can be dynamically created and removed. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. So the basic idea is we have the bootstrap config so the orchestrator will create the keyrings and do the minimal bootstrap config just to get Ganesha up. And then it has a watch URL that points at a Rados pool. And then inside that watch URL, that's where we place like either the volumes module or the dashboard will place the export config facils and stuff like that.
Okay.
So, Michael, the idea here is, I guess we got to think big picture for both deployment backends. So you're thinking the Rook should eventually also have this RGW block with a special user, just the same as CephADM, no longer use the admin key, and either the dashboard or the volumes plugin should be creating the actual export blocks for RGW.
Yes, yeah, exactly. But as Varsha pointed out, it's less than ideal to maintain this in both Rook and CephADM. So there is a good argument to lift this config template up, like maybe at the orchestrator level, and let it be consumable by both.
I think that kind of makes sense. I've been beating this drum for a while, and I realize it's not quite easy to get where we want to be, but the deployment backend, either CephADM or Rook, should be as stupid as possible.
Yeah, agreed. And so currently with CephADM, we actually generate the Ginger template, and then we just inject it via JSON, the CephADM binary. So we could do a similar thing with Rook, assuming that we have the orchestrator interfaces plugged in for Rook.
Do we know who did the NFS work for Rook?
Long ago, it was done by Travis, and also Jeff, and it's been slowly being updated, I think, by Sebastian Hahn.
Okay. I wonder if we just need to, does it matter if well, I guess first question is is this direction, is the CephADM behavior here, is this direction that we want to go in? And so are we good from a CephADM perspective? And then I guess the second thing is, should we get those people in a room and figure out what needs to be done on the Rook side to make these two things converge?
Well, I think, first we got to decide whether what CephADM is doing is the right approach. And I guess so. If we can lift it into the orchestrator layer, that would be fine. Varsha, did you have more thoughts on this?
That is fine. Other option would be to add it to the interface, the current cluster create interface, like an RGW flag or something, so that it will add the config with this particular thing, customized config block to it. So whatever is set up by CephADM or Rook.
I think that last option is a little bit more complicated on the user end, because then they have to make a selection between CephFS or RGW. When in fact, the only real config item there is a keyring that we need to generate anyway. So
Oh, no,
behind
no.
the
What
scenes.
I'm suggesting is like both Ceph, FS and RGW would be supported by the same cluster. If they add in a flag instead of using a type here, if we add in a flag, it will add the whatever required block is required to the Rados and just restart the daemon.
Is there any reason not to just always include the RGW key though? Like, it's harmless if you don't actually have an RGW export, right? Like, why not just make it ready to go in case you add one later?
That's been my viewpoint because as soon as you create the export and mount it, that's when RGW actually loads um, within the Ganesha daemon. It's harmless.
Yeah, and I mean, even if Rook doesn't like create an RGW user and chooses to continue using client.admin, like that shouldn't break anything either. That's just like Rook's choice of model or whatever, right?
My instinct is to keep keep the NFS cluster as specific as possible. Since these are so cheap to spin up, I don't really like the idea of an NFS cluster serving both RGW and CephFS. I don't really feel that's it's necessary to support that level of flexibility.
The downside is there's a level of complexity because then the dashboard, when it configures exports, would need to be aware of the difference. And then also we would need to support multiple Ganesha daemons per host, potentially, which right now it's just one-to-one.
I mean, can you set up multiple instances of the Ganesha service right now, like multiple NFS clusters?
Yeah.
You can, but they need to be on differing hosts because we don't actually
Yeah.
change the port. You end up with a port conflict on the NFS.
Yeah. And that can be
Can be
fixed, but I'm just wondering if there's like a reasonable use case for doing that.
Yeah. Also, remember there was an Etherpad for NFS and Ganesha, but I think I've been taking a look and it's a little bit outdated for the last, what I see. Well, right now from the dashboard side, we have to fix the NFS version 4 in dashboard because right now it's broken and we have to fix it in dashboard also.
I think with the CephADM backports for Octopus, NFS with the dashboard is already broken. And there's been various discussions about aligning it with the volumes plugin, which Varch is actually in the process of ripping out into a separate NFS plugin that's orthogonal, so that the dashboard is not doing its own special thing. It's using the NFS plugin, but there are various technical barriers to getting that done, and also just lack of resources to dedicate to it. But as far as I know, the current stance is that dashboard is already broken. It doesn't work with CephADM's NFS deployments. Is that still correct, Michael?
I think it's partially correct. Kiefer did a bunch of work to make that work. There's a couple like awkward things, like you can select there's an NFS checkbox, NFS v3 checkbox during the export, but that turns out to be a no-op because we support NFS v4 only. So you can make the selection, but you don't get a v3 protocol. It's not configured that way, but it's harmless. I mean, it's not more of a cosmetic issue than anything.
I mean, I guess.
Do you know if RGW is getting a call? Please continue without me.
I mean, just backing up a sec to the bigger question of like whether it makes sense to have separate NFS clusters for RGW and CephFS in multiple instances. Like it almost feels like it almost seems like that might be orthogonal, because I guess the thing that I'm most concerned about is just like simplicity, like, and if somebody says like, I want NFS, you're like, great, here's your NFS server. And then, because I mean, the way NFS 4 works anyway, you already have like multiple exports under, and whether they're under one server or multiple servers, like doesn't matter that much, except that the IP is going to be different. So
But
having the user
the
just see like an NFS server running, and then they're like, all right, I'm going to add an RGW export, I'm going to add a CephFS export, I'm going to add another CephFS export. Like it just seems like just easy
It's
to
not quite
easy
that
to think about.
simple, Sage, because the NFS clusters coordinate with their recovery. So we do, I think the grand vision was that we'd be able to set up clusters based off of like tenants.
Right. Right. Yeah.
And so we were trying to keep them separate so that recovery could be more rapid.
Right. Right.
So right now, each NFS server has to go into Grace whenever you have a failover. So that's the current design would allow for you to massively scale out the number of NFS servers, Ceph cluster, and that's why I was trying to discourage having an NFS cluster support multiple different export types. Not because it can't, but more we don't want them to think that way anyway.
You don't want the users to think that way, you mean?
Yeah, it's cheap to deploy more NFS servers. At least that's true with Rook. With Ceph ADM, it's harder because they can only listen on one port.
I mean, with NFS 4, you can run on any port, right? That's all.
Not currently with Ceph ADM. I think the port is hard coded.
Yeah, but we could. I mean, that's an easy fix now that we're doing port allocation stuff.
It's easy to fix, but I don't think the multi-tenancy really has much to do with RGW or SFFS. It's more just put the Rados recovery objects in a different namespace. Isn't that true? And then that should be good enough, I would think.
I think it would affect all the NFS clients though. And I'm not exactly sure how the recovery works for RGW exports anyway.
I don't think there's any guessing.
But,
Probably nothing special going on.
I think the recovery though is like based on Ganesha Grace, so that's based on the NFS daemon. It's nothing to do with the export really. No. So the daemons are
That's
just
not quite correct because the StephFS has to participate with the NFS daemon during recovery. One thing it has to do is recover the prior session of the NFS server. That way it doesn't lose caps. And to be complete, I don't think that's actually working correctly. So one thing it does is it just kills off the prior session. I'd have to check with Jeff how that currently works.
And my guess is that the RGW export mode though is like mostly stateless.
Yeah.
Or at least pretends.
In fact, it might be recommended to use v3 with that, just for backwards compatibility purposes. But I don't really think that's required. I actually have to go. I have another conflict, so Varsha can continue this without me. Sorry.
Okay.
Bye.
Okay. Right. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, all that makes it sound like there's a valid use case for setting up lots of different NFS servers, and there are probably some improvements that we can make there to make that work a little bit better with making sure that they don't collide on the same hosts and run on separate ports and all that stuff. But that seems a little bit orthogonal to whether the same daemon could also serve an RGW if you wanted to do that. It might be worth checking with the person who wrote the RGW NFS backend just to see if there are any implications with the going into Grace and recovery. Was that That was probably Eric. Yeah. Because I mean, there's sort of like two different sets of users, right? There are the sets of users that are going to have multiple tenants. It's like a cloud provider. They're going to have lots of different NFS. It's like the Manila use case with OpenStack, and we need to be able to support those well. And they're not going to care about an RGW export like that tenant probably. Certainly not anytime soon. And then there's the other case where you just have like a medium-sized Ceph cluster and you just want NFS and you don't want to have to think about anything. And I think in that case, it would be weird to like, not that weird. And it'd be kind of might be confusing for the user where there's like one IP that you're going to use if you're going to mount CephFS. There's a different IP that you're going to use if you're going to mount RGW. And then the idea of having just like the NFS server serve both sounds kind of appealing in that case.
But so from the UI perspective, the user shouldn't be able to select the backstore, you mean? So it should be only have a user interface in order to set up an FS without caring about what is the backstore?
Well, or I mean, I think they should be able to choose if there are multiple, but they shouldn't have to like create a separate one if they don't care. They're just like, that's the NFS cluster, just in one. So it should be easy to not have to worry about it, I guess.
No, I'm trying to find the use case where RGW should be required from the UI perspective to be shown as a selectable backstore. What should be the use case for this, or there shouldn't be any use case for this?
Well, I think that's the crux of the question. We don't have that currently.
Yeah.
We're thinking about adding it. And I still kind of agree with that simplicity case, though. I kind of like that better, personally.
I mean, at the end of it, I'm not really sure how people are using the NFS gateway for RGW, but the way that I think it was intended to be used is for like import and export. I'm imagining that most of those users like having one service that is used for all the RGW in the cluster, like is probably fine. I don't imagine like a multi-tenant use case, but I might just not be a failure of imagination or whatever. I guess I don't think that we should, if we can avoid it, I don't know that we should go down a path that like precludes being able to do that in the future. Especially since we do that for CephFS already, right? But it doesn't necessarily have to be part of the UI immediately if we don't imagine it's needed, as long as it's possible on the back end.
I think that the functionality is there, okay? Not using probably the orchestrator or the dashboard, but you can configure the system in order to do a lot of things, okay? So maybe we need only to decide to provide a simple use case in the orchestrator and in the dashboard, okay? Or maybe more complex use cases in the orchestrator and more simple one in the dashboard, okay? And well, probably I don't know if we are going to to go to the most used or most usable use case, okay? But probably well, it's just to provide a kind of service. If we want to cover all the different needs in the orchestrator and in the dashboard and overall in the dashboard, probably we are going to have something very complex to use. So maybe start with something simple and go in the direction that well, to provide more usability, okay? But I think that it will be good to start with something simple in the dashboard, something a little bit more complex in the orchestrator layer. And if you want a very complex use case with different kind of possibilities, you always have directly the command line with and interact with the different configuration of the Ceph cluster and the Ceph diamonds.
Yeah.
So in my mind, I think we definitely need like the multi-port thing. We need the AJ proxy thing that you're doing, Sage, and then we need the work that Barsha is doing to split out the volumes module into an independent module, and then lift this config up into the orchestrator. I think those four things we definitely want, and then we could easily come back later and add a flag for the backing store and just change the config. It would be pretty trivial to add if we discover we need that.
Just to make sure I understand what the problem is here. So right now, this RGW block that just specifies an RGW user, that's going in the conf file that inside the container. Can it go in the config that's living in Rados instead? Or does it?
It could, but it's a little bit awkward because the orchestrator is managing the keyring. And so it's like we'd be managing the keyrings in two different
Oh,
ways.
I see. Okay. Yeah.
We have one
Okay.
one for CephFS and one for RGW. Yeah, so
Yeah.
kind of like the symmetry there.
I mean, yeah. But, I mean, can you have a keyring for each export? No.
Yes, we do have a keyring for each export. Like for each export, there's a different keyring. But that is managed by the volumes plugin.
Okay. Because I wonder if that's like a simpler model to go to, because then that like simplifies the daemon even more, right?
I think we still need this keyring for the Ganesha Grace for the daemon startup. That's how we ended up with most of this in the Bootstrap config to begin with. And in the case of RGW, there isn't really a CephX keyring. It's a access key and a secret key. It's more based on the S3 user.
Yes, but for CephFS, we are managing the keyring. But for RGW, I think. But what's wrong with like having that RGW flag in the cluster create? Then we can kind of support both the use cases, though it would be little complicated. Then at least at Ceph ADM and at the rook level, the config would be simpler.
Yeah. I mean, I'm looking at the config right now. Like this Rados KV thing, that's where the Grace is managed, right?
That's right. Yeah. Well, that's access to the Rados recovery pool.
Yeah. Right.
It's the recovery backend in the NFS v4 block specifically that does Ganesha Grace.
Right. So that's the only, well, oh, and the Rados URL, sorry. And then this Rados URLs is the one that's used for the URL that includes the rest of the configs. So that's the one user that needs to go in the root. And then this RGW one, that could basically go copy of that in each export block for each RGW export so that each one has a separate user.
Good.
Similar to what the volumes plugin is doing.
Yeah, but then someone else would need to manage the keyring. So,
yeah, I mean, the volumes plugin already does that, right? So if I don't know if the idea is that the volumes plugin also understands RGW exports or whatever, but whatever it is that's managing the RGW exports, wherever that is, like that should be responsible for setting up keys. Because that's common for both Rook and Ceph ADM, right? It doesn't, especially since, yeah, they're both deploying the same Ganesha config thing, hopefully
Yeah.
identical. Yeah.
Well, that doesn't exist right now. So like the
Yeah.
dashboard just creates the FASL without a keyring, so without this block.
Yeah, but it should probably, I mean, we should probably change that so
Okay.
that either
Yeah.
the volumes plugin is extended to also know about RGW, which I'm guessing is not what we want, but maybe, and then, or there's another module that's responsible for setting up RGW exports, doing that, and then that can be used by both Rook and by FADM.
Mhm.
Does that make sense? Does that sound right, Parsha?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. And then that's all orthogonal to like how we decide to deploy it, whether there are different Ganeshas for about only RGW exports or only CephFS exports, or they're mixed together. Like that's all totally separate decision to be made later by the user or by us or whatever. How? So wait. So right now, the only way to set up one of these RGW NFS exports is through the dashboard, or is there a CLI way to do it as well?
It's only through the dashboard. The volumes plugin only does FFS right now. So,
Yeah. I mean that's the gap anyway, right?
yeah. Yep.
You probably want to be able to. Oh, we probably want a way to do this. That's not through the dashboard.
Yeah. As long as we make sure we don't keep diverging, because we've been having that problem with the dashboard. So this is the thing
Yeah.
Alfonso was
Well, I
kind
mean, right. I mean, I think the way forward would be to create a manager module that manages RGW stuff, add the ability to manage this export there, and then change the dashboard to consume that just the way it consumes the volumes plugin. That way, we're just basically moving the code from the dashboard to this other thing, this new module, adding access to that same interface from the CLI.
Okay. And then interaction with the orchestrator to figure out what the
Yeah. Right.
latest config is.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. That actually works in line with what I'm doing currently. Like I'm moving out the entire NFS related stuff from the volumes plugin out. So I can simplify that further, that it can also, like dashboard can also consume it. But a substantial amount of work needs to be done on the dashboard part to get it integrated, I would say, afterwards.
Okay. Well, it sounds reasonable to me. I mean, it could almost go in Orchestrator itself instead of a separate thing.
That's what I was kind of wondering. Yeah, but that's the right place. That is kind of the role of the orchestrator, really, is to in the architecture.
The common, yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I think in the end it doesn't matter that much whether it's in orchestrator.py or in RGW support.py or whatever. It just whatever. It just needs to land somewhere. Yeah. Probably slightly more expedient just to put it in the orchestrator.py. Or whatever, orchestrator/module.
That will be the same scheme that we are going. We will need to use in order to configure, for example, RGW multisite.
Yeah, I guess. Oh, excuse me. So okay, so I guess that's the other thing. So there's this adjacent problem of all of the RGW CLI stuff being in Rados Gateway Admin instead of the Ceph CLI. And I would love to fix that. And I suspect that the way to do that is to basically just start by creating an RGW module in the manager that basically takes every Rados Gateway Admin command and just maps it over and maybe like, cleans it up a little bit and then makes the manager just shell out to Rados Gateway Admin for everything. It's kind of a janky like architecture, but it unifies the CLI and allows the manager to control everything. And then in the future, we might, change it on the back end so that instead of actually having that code, instead of shelling out to Rados Gateway Admin, we actually just make that Rados Gateway Admin code run in the manager itself through librgw or something. But that can be sort of an asynchronous future task. But if that were the case, if that is the direction that we go, then it might make sense. Maybe this lives in that module instead of in the orchestrator. Or maybe not. I mean, this is really kind of specific to managing NFS servers and just creating keys. So it's not actually super related to RGW itself. So maybe it does live in the orchestrator even then.
Okay.
I guess that would be that's kind of my gut says, just put it in orchestrator.
I think that keeps things a lot more simple implementation-wise, so we don't have a lot of indirection.
Yeah.
It'd be nice. So.
Yep. Cool. Okay.
Did we cover what we want to do with this PR though, with the type and the volumes module? Did we get resolved?
Oh, right. Yeah, I guess yeah. So back to the PR. I mean, if I'm understanding the situation correctly, we still don't need that type in there, right? Because the Ganesha daemon itself is going to be totally generic, regardless of whether we have CephFS exports or RGW exports. Is that right?
That would be my
Varsha?
viewpoint. Yeah.
But if Orchestrator, if another plugin is going to handle the RGW part or RGW export is going to handle it, it should know some way that okay. But what about the backward compatibility there?
I'm not sure that it matters because I don't know that almost anybody has deployed this with Octopus. Is my guess. I don't know.
We have some downstream deployments of this, so we do need an upgrade path. Yeah.
Okay. Can we make that your problem?
Hey.
Well, I mean, I guess it still seems like going forward there shouldn't be a type associated with an NFS Ganesha, right? On upgrade, we should just rejigger the existing Ganesha so that it is the typeless kind. They'll still work.
Yes, okay. That's what I meant. That's what we have is the typeless kind. Yeah, I would prefer to keep it that way. And then let the higher level module just worry about exports, whether they be RGW or whatnot in the tendency.
Is it a different meeting, Sage, than the NVMeOF meeting?
We're just running over. I think we're basically done. Does that work, Varsha?
Yes.
Are you still worried about this?
Let me just to make sure we're on the same page. So the RGW export interface will take care of the keyring which is required, right? So the NFS clustering interface will need not have to worry about all that stuff. It will just deploy the daemons. And this RGW block would be removed from the Ceph ADM part, right?
Yeah.
Sorry, we actually can't do that because we can't have multiple RGW blocks. So, is this a good topic for Quincy? Maybe we just add it there.
Yeah.
Okay. Keep this discussion going.
All right. Sounds good. Next week.
Sounds good.
All right. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.
Over. Take care.
I always wondered how we avoided colliding with other meetings on the same URL.
Who's running this meeting?
Well, it was Jason, and this week,
All right.
this week we were going to discover who Jason Prime was.
Supposed to be Greg Farnham initially, but without Greg. And
I'm
he's
here, but
he is here.
but I also have been in this meeting precisely once and have no idea what's happening yet. So maybe one of you should do it for the moment.
Well, we can review where we are, or where we all think we are, and which is in this system of Etherpads here.
Yeah.
Scott, would you mind sort of taking it for this week, and we'll keep working on catching up?
I could do that. It'll make it pretty short because actually I took 3 days off during spring break when I didn't have to do dad stuff for my son to get him to do his homework. It's like, oh, I should take a vacation too. So, right. So where we are is basically we have agreed, I think, on what we want, which is actually no small thing. It was surprisingly easy to come to consensus on what we wanted, probably because it's pretty obvious. The key things there are basically we want an NVMe for Fabrics to Ceph gateway. I, as the Intel representative here, am interested in this from the point of view of enabling ADNN to be used here, but it's pretty simple and makes sense to construct this gateway so that that's optional. There's a number of reasons at various scales where at an extreme scale, there's some challenges for ADNN. At moderate scale, it can work and we can use this gateway that way. And at other scales, you may, for various reasons, want dedicated gateways. So we actually have previously discussed the topic of scale. And there is some interest in a sort of, although we're trying to come up with a solution that works at any scale, even the extreme, you might even call it absurd scale, thousands of nodes, right? Everything is hard at that scale. We want to make sure it's not impossible there, but there is quite a bit of interest in sort of medium-sized clusters that may have 32-ish nodes to something like that. It's an explicit goal of ours to enable the bare metal host use case, which requires a SmartNIC in the host that includes some NVMe over Fabrics initiator capabilities, potentially including the ADNN host redirector, so you can have a one-hop solution to a Ceph backend of medium size. I don't think it's in our scope of work to explicitly construct a host SmartNIC and everything that requires, mostly because there's no common platform we can all use, right? Especially if you work for Intel. So we're concentrating on the gateway part and leaving the host part as an exercise for some of you. There were some, I always get confused about which of you IBM folks with IBM.com in your email address work for the research part. I'm guessing that if you're in Zurich, you're IBM Research, and if you're not in Zurich, you're probably IBM Cloud or something else. You don't
Probably.
know.
If you have a zurich.ibm.com, you're in the Zurich lab, and if you have a ch.ibm.com, you're working for IBM Switzerland.
Which doesn't necessarily mean you're cloud. It just means that you're doing something else at IBM.
Right. But that's not entirely true for the US. So there are some people in the US working in research, and they don't have a special kind of.
Okay.
It's not as easy as looking at the.
Yeah, as someone worked in IBM Israel, in Israel, it just looks like you are from Israel. You cannot see if you are from research or from IBM.
Right.
But I know that actually from Israel, at least Danny is in research.
I think most of the people on the call are from research.
Yeah.
Danny, Nicholas, me, we're all from research.
Right. Some people have.
We're pretty closely aligned, right? Just to be clear, between research.
Well, you would hope so. I mean, if you all work for it, yeah, we're supposed to do that too.
There isn't a concern that it's research versus development, I guess, is what I'm saying.
Well, okay, so some of the people that work for IBM Research and some of the Red Hat people have been under various NDAs and have been in other meetings where we talk about things that we will not talk about here, going either direction. It's one of the things I wanted to point out. So when we talk about smart NICs, there's, we're here talking about a sort of generic smart NIC or one that everybody can buy, which unfortunately for me is from our competitor, but that's the way it is. So we can talk about that, but anything else more specific will be conspicuously absent here. You guys have all been in, well, most of you have been in this meeting before, but we're sort of catching up the other people. That's why there may be strange blank places here. It's because of that. Unannounced products, things like that. So, but it seems to me that this hasn't really slowed us down because it's all, the building blocks are pretty much the same. So we can march towards that. Why I mentioned the IBM Cloud guys was they had I've heard some interesting comments. I have some notes, but I never managed to note who it is that's speaking because, we all sound kind of like robots on this compressed audio call. So, about scale and other things like that. But you're right. We're all, we all have pretty much the same goals here. So where we're at, progress-wise, is we've decided to just go off and build something. And if you look at which one is it here? So Jason had constructed a set of companion Etherpads here. And there's the MVMF management layer. No, that's not really. Well, he created a Git repo. It has sort of the prototype, basically refactored from the iSCSI gateway, all that Python stuff. He started constructing a skeleton gateway that would work for MVMember fabrics. I have actually not looked at this code specifically. I had an AR, which I have not yet completed, to add a version of SPDK to that repo so that we'd have the actual target process. And that hasn't happened because the release version of SPDK isn't the right choice. Unfortunately, we need some kind of Frankenstein branch here. It has to be based on something stable. It has to have the fixes to the RBD BDev. Oh, incidentally, there's a list here in the RBD NVMF target Etherpad of things that various people that have done experiments with SPDK to talk to RBD at scale have run into, and chief among them was this huge scaling limit, which we discovered was because when an RBD BDev is instantiated, it actually creates a Rados context per reactor thread per image, and opens the image per reactor thread, which was not the right answer. There's an RFC patch. Did we actually? Yeah, I think if you look in the meeting Etherpad a couple weeks back, I pointed at an RFC. Yeah, this was on the 16th. So for anyone interested, you can look at the status of that SPDK patch, which addresses the most egregious issues there. And maybe I haven't reported this yet, but there has been I had a conversation with the SPDK folks about making the Rados context a singleton like it needs to be. And they're in agreement, and that's accepted and will be done by someone. I'm not sure who. I think I know, but I can't speak for him. So the SPDK we use here in this Git repo has to include that. So I have to do that. I have to basically make us a custom branch which is going to be kind of a nightmare, really. We're going to have patches we have to keep rebased in there, and by nightmare I mean there'll be status that has to be reported, and it'll be rebased every once in a while, and whoever's using it will need to know that, and so that's the sort of planning thing we'll have to undertake here when someone's ready to actually try this. Speaking of that, we got someone's. Was it Jonas that offered to try out the fixed RBD BDEV or speculated?
Yeah, that was me.
Okay.
But I didn't have time yet. But I have something for later if you want to finish first for
Okay.
kind of the discussion subsystems versus namespaces that we had, right?
Oh, right. Yeah, I got some feedback from the SPDK guys on that too. So just wrapping that up then, the patch, you can see the URL2 there only addresses the opening the image multiple times on each reactor thread. So it'll help some, but you'll still have one whole Rados context per image. So I'm not sure it's going to actually increase the number of images you can open tremendously. But we're talking about this because the SPDK team has asked for feedback on whether this helps, at least goes the right direction. They, don't. A real Ceph cluster is not part of the CI environment for SPDK, so they'd have to go construct something specific to do that. And the message is that while they can get this fairly simple patch done, that's not a science project they can do quickly. So it would help if someone, that could be me too, but my Ceph cluster can't be powered on in my lab right now because I've only got 2 kilowatts per rack, which is dumb, but that's where I'm at. So let's see, wrapping back up, that was a detour through the RBD BDEV, but our overall plan is to put something together so that we can at least talk about, use that as a place to stand to say, okay, here's what we should be building. Right. So in this management layer, there's got to be, we sort of agreed there would be, although I don't even know where to look for it yet, a mechanism to specify exactly where gateways go, a mechanism to associate, obviously to define which images get exposed to which hosts, and ideally a way to associate each host with a specific gateway or set of them so that you can decide, where in your data center this I/O should flow. What the state of that is, I can't say, but that's going. So that's probably a messy and complete enough summary of where we are for those of you just joining us. But feel free to ask any questions, or Jonas, if you wanted to take over from there.
Can I ask a couple questions about where we think we're going?
Where?
I'm just trying to get a high level view of like so there's all this work, there's the work that needs to happen on the Ceph in GMEOF repo, which is like the API endpoint to configure all this stuff and set it up. There's some work on the SPDK side to move to a single interface. But I'm wondering like what we think is going to need to happen on the libRBD side, because I know that there is this big transition that just happened, moving to a reactor model for all the I/O, but it's using Boost ASIO. And one of the things that Jason mentioned was that it would be great if we could swap out the Boost ASIO reactor with the C-star reactor so that it could run sort of more tightly integrated with the rest of SPDK, and also reuse like the C-star implementation of the messenger that we're using for Crimson and so on. But I don't have a sense of like whether that's something that can be done or not. I don't, having not worked with Boost ASIO or C-star yet. Is that something that we're thinking about?
I think that's something we thought about thinking about after we got a prototype working, so we could see. Yeah, that all makes sense. It came up at least in general terms. I personally have little knowledge about what's going on in libRBD. In that sense, it's been, last time I looked in there closely was the RWL stuff. So. So ultimately, that would make sense. I mean, where I think we're going is there is a requirements page, by the way. It's RBD and BMF requirements. There's a link to it from the main one, probably in one of the early meetings. So that's sort of our statement of what we all collectively want. And in general terms, it's for there to be a package that definitely works with a released version of Ceph that gets you this capability, so people can just use this. If libRBD evolved, the RBD BDEV for SPDK would need to evolve with it. There seems to have been in recent meetings mention of of using kernel NVMe over fabrics, which is not something that interests me greatly. It's not really aligned with our specific goals from this. It may make architectural sense for some people. Obviously, that's what the iSCSI gateway does. On the other hand, in my experience with that stuff, about daemons that steer the kernel on hosts is always kind of a nightmare because it's like a shared resource and things go wrong. So, but that plays into what somebody's about to bring up here, which is the multiple subsystems versus LUN masking in one subsystem. The SPDK cannot support multiple subsystems per target, and the kernel can. So, does that answer your question about where we're going?
I think so. Yeah, I don't know what. I'm curious what that means, though. The multiple subsystems target.
So, in a nutshell, in the sort of object naming scheme in VMware Fabrics, which, unless I have the spec in front of me, I'm liable to misquote. So forgive me.
Yeah,
for
that's
that.
why I made some slides actually.
Oh, good. All right. You know what? Let's just let Jonas take that up since he's the spec.
Let me share my screen because the nomenclature is always a bit confusing. Can you see my screen?
I can.
Okay, I hope it's the right one.
It says subsystem at the top.
Right. Okay. So this is just basically from the spec. I took this from some other slides I did for NVMe spec summary, just for all the naming stuff, right? And essentially, right, you have a controller. A controller has namespaces underneath it, and the namespaces are the actual data, right? So this is actually what you see in def NVMe 0 N1 would be namespace 1, right? N2 would be namespace 2, and so on. And all these are part of a subsystem. And by the way, just a fun thing in Linux, the naming scheme is actually that the 0 in NVMe 0 is controller 0 and not subsystem 0. So there's actually a second naming scheme they have for multipath, which includes all three. So then you have a controller ID, you have a subsystem ID, and you have a namespace ID. So naming is quite complex. And this exactly brings us here to how multipath is implemented. Since for this gateway we are building, or this translation layer, right, we want it to be fault tolerant. That means we also want it to be able to handle, to do this with multipath in NVMe. And how this works is essentially that two controllers share a namespace, but the namespace for that to be shared need to be in the same subsystem. And the controllers obviously can be different targets. Okay, then one thing that kind of is also something that comes up when talking about this and resources is that you need a admin queue pair and an IO queue pair to talk to a controller. And what this means in terms of NVMe over Fabrics is that you actually need, per definition from the standard, I just copied them out here, is that you need a single connection for each queue you create. That means if you connect to a target, you need at least two connections, a admin queue pair connection and a IO queue pair connection. And then for every other queue pair you create, you need another connection.
Well, in RDMA, the queue pairs are kind of children of the connection, right? You can add a queue pair.
Well, technically, they are new connections.
I thought you only authenticated once and you got one, because they share like the RDMA or what do they call it?
So there's a protection domain which they share.
It.
Right.
Yeah, so you can RDMA, you can get transfer buffers over any connection from any of the other connections.
But at least if you look at, for instance, the IBOS specification, a new queue pair is a new connection in that sense.
It's because it's TCP, right?
Right. So yeah, I mean, yeah, maybe you can view it that way, but I mean, what it means is you need resources, right, for that, right? And this is kind of how the mapping works, right? So RDMA queue pair to to IO or admin queue pair, and a TCP connection to a admin or IO queue pair. And what this means is this is basically what we want to build, right? So you have some Ceph nodes here in red. You have a subsystem that spans all these nodes. You have some SPDK controllers or targets, right? I just intermixed the term here. Also, that's not perfectly correct, but fine. That's, I think, okay for this picture. And then you have a shared namespace, and the namespace is basically directly reflects an RBD image, right? And what this means is if you have an initiator on this side, is that you need at least 4 connections to just basically have multipathing to a single RBD image, right? Because you have 1, 2, 3, 4 queues, right?
Right.
And why I mentioned this is because that is important if we talk about the subsystem versus namespace model in terms of resources you need, right? And essentially, this is what I wrote down. Very simple, is probably totally incomplete, but what you want is probably you want an initiator that cryptographically authenticates itself, right, to assert its identity. So you probably want to have both IPsec on a fabric and some NVMe invent authentication. And obviously, the initiator should only be able to access and see those volumes which he has access to, right?
That's the unmasking thing.
Right. So, and this is how. So I just pictured the 2 models that we discussed before. So this would be the subsystem model, which means essentially you do the isolation at the subsystem level. You have multiple subsystems. I only drew one Ceph node here, but I mean, you get the picture with multipaths and so on. So essentially, you connect to this SPDK target, you authenticate yourself, and then you can access subsystem, for instance, O in this case, and you can list all the namespaces that is in there, done, right? And then another initiator can connect to authenticate itself, gets access to the subsystem P, and sees its namespace, right? So that's the subsystem model. As I said before, right? So the connections or the queues, they are basically on the basis of a subsystem, right? So you need a admin and a IO queue per subsystem. You cannot access another subsystem with the same queue pair, essentially. But you can, within a subsystem over the same connection, access multiple namespaces.
Right. So the namespace model, your SmartNIC can make one connection to a target and expose, your hypervisor, for instance, could expose 100 different images to 100 different virtual machines and one connection.
So this picture, essentially, you only have, let's say, one subsystem. You, of course, can still have multiple, but for simplicity, let's say one subsystem. And then for the lack of better term, I call them, you create kind of virtual subsystems, so let's call them dynamic subsystems, whatever you like them to call them, right? Which basically lets you connect to the subsystem, but when you authenticate yourself with the subsystem and some client ID, you only see the namespaces you are allowed to see, right? So you cannot enumerate all the namespaces in the subsystem.
Well, you think you are, but you get a different.
Well, exactly. So from the initiator point of view, right, it looks like it only has this one namespace in it, right? So you don't see a difference in connecting to any other subsystem, right?
Right.
So and then I wrote down a few points that just came to my mind while creating these, right? So obviously what we already talked about, the subsystem model means you need a lot of connections, at least 4 if you do multipathing per subsystem. So that could become a scaling issue depending on how many volumes you want to support, and you want to isolate every one of them in a subsystem. And basically then you do the authentication, you do on a subsystem level, right? Whereas a namespace model, you do the authentication on basically you need one additional ID, you have a client ID and a subsystem or something like that.
Well, actually, I think
Uh,
it plays. I think that's already there. If you authenticate a host to a subsystem, and that subsystem has a map of which host should see what namespaces, then the authentication
Yes, so
shouldn't change.
that is correct. In SPDK, there's a host that you can filter by host or allowed host list, right? So it takes the host NQN and checks if it's in the allowed host list. That you can
Right.
do. Obviously, it's not cryptographic. It's just a simple check. I mean, even if you do IPsec, it's not super secure.
Right.
So
And
yeah,
it's
so
all or none. You either attach to the
right,
subsystem or you
right.
don't, and that would need to be changed. So
But yeah, exactly, you could use this information obviously to then say, oh yeah, this is this host NQN, he gets this dynamic view of the subsystem, right?
So, Jonas, could I interrupt you quickly to
Sure.
bring up the NVMe TWG issue? Was it you that was considering attending that and dropping in and found that you could be a member because of where you work in IBM? Or was it somebody else?
I'm not sure. I mean we have access. I mean we got access to the working groups.
Okay.
You mean the security working group?
Yes, all the ongoing
Yeah.
work. So the issue
Yeah,
for
yeah,
us
yeah.
here is this is a public meeting and the NVMe
Right.
TWG is open only to its members, and you can't disclose what's going on in there until they release a spec or one of the charter members just submits a press release about it, which has happened. So, but that works to our advantage because if you can find that, you can talk about it in public, what the other company said. But we
Right.
can't. So if you want to know exactly what's going on with authentication, you currently really need to you need to get access to that TWG so you can look at their documents. You don't need to sit through the whole weekly 2-hour meeting, but you could if you wanted to. Anyway, that was it.
Right. Since the current specification talks about NVMe, but it's basically just a placeholder. It doesn't have anything specific in there. It's really, really vague, right? I think that will change.
It's not done.
Yeah, it's basically not done. Yeah. Yeah, that's essentially it. So a few points I made here about, okay, yes, you basically can share then the connections, right? That's great. You basically inherit the properties of the controller you connect to. So maximum transfer size, arbitration, and these kind of things. But that's also something you could basically come around by allowing you to connect to different sets of controllers would be possible, for instance. And one thing I think that you have to keep in mind here is that, let's say you have a virtualized environment, you have a VM here and a VM here, you have a VM here and you move it to here, right? You would need to basically remove the namespace here and create a new namespace in this virtual subsystem here, right? So you probably want your, if you use SmartNICs, want your SmartNIC to support something like namespace attribute changed as asynchronous event notification to handle these kind of events, right?
Yeah, the SPDK stuff already handles that. If you add a namespace to a target, the initiator gets that notification, and a bdev for the namespace just appears in the client. So, and the other way around, a little messier, but.
So that's just my summary.
Hey, this is awesome. Could you scroll back to the slide titled Ceph NVMe Fabrics Multipath?
Yep.
Okay, so this is, and your focus is on, I got to say, this is multipathing in NVMe Fabrics is called ANA for asymmetric namespace. I can't remember exactly why they chose that.
Yeah, it's asymmetric namespace access.
It's multipathing, and if you've done iSCSI, multipathing. It's all the same. And the sort of goal here for the group, this is more coming from the IBM side, and Intel is not specifically interested in the ANA HA case. This is just another multi-node HA JBOF from us old storage veterans' point of view. It should exist, but somebody will do it. I got to point out that. ADNN, the thing that actually brought me here, does not require ANA. So in an ADNN situation, the connections, you'll only have one connection from each host to each gateway, but you'll want to be connecting to a lot of gateways. So that was not addressed in any of your slides, not surprisingly, because you're focused on the ANA thing. If I was prepared for this. I could have a companion slide here that shows that that other situation, if you look at the, I probably covered that in the CDM in October when we first talked
Yeah.
about this. So in that situation, we've got a gateway in ideally every OSD node when there's some reasonable number of them. And we don't have to do this multipathing because all of those are separate subsystems with separate NQNs. That's another thing to observe here is the subsystem actually has an NQN. And if you split this over hosts, then all the properties have to be, you have to synchronize, the actual NSIDs, the state of everything has to be, tightly coupled, just like any other HA sort of heartbeat situation, pairwise HA. In the ADNN case, it's all much more loosely coupled, but you have a lot more connections. So, and of course, you need an initiator that understands the hints.
Right. And if you're talking SmartNIC, then you have to convince a SmartNIC vendor to implement something like.
Well, you can tell a SmartNIC vendor to use SPDK, and the ADNN support is, already there in prototype form. So.
Right, but I mean, from most that's out there, from also experience that we had, right? You probably can't do line rate on a SmartNIC ARM side, right? You need something more powerful. Yeah, maybe you can do this with an FPGA SmartNIC, but certainly not with, for instance, a Mellanox Bluefield or something like that. Not at line speed, at least.
That may be true. Stay tuned, I guess is all I can say.
Yeah, sure. Eventually, yes.
So that's our goal. Is we want all that packed into the host SmartNIC, and ANA then becomes orthogonal to this. There's reasons that you might want all your paths to be HA. Maybe you can't take the latency hit for a failed path that now has to whatever. So I'm just pointing out that distinction. So this makes for Sage's benefit here about what are we doing and why. It sort of makes solution space have another dimension here. It doesn't seem that big a deal to me. There's a use case.
Just maybe one thing to add is that in the beginning, I guess we are fine with not having active. We can do active passive, and then maybe the problem is a bit easier, quote unquote.
Yeah, active requires RBD changes, right? You'd have to figure out how you could open the image from more than one node if you wanted it to have features that required the exclusive lock. Would be your box there has the RBD image split across nodes, so
right.
We can't really do that right now.
Well, this was just to denote that the RBD image obviously spread across multiple nodes, right?
Yeah, right. And to be fair, ADNN has exactly the same problem, right? We need to open the image at every gateway node, and so if you need an exclusive lock, you can't have one.
Right.
So we're just sort of punting that for now. So one view of that is, well, one of the things you might need that for is reservations, and well, you can implement reservations at the NVMe fabrics level and not actually hold the lock on the image if that actually works for the feature set you're using. But anyway, we have two dimensions. That's why the gateway requirements and the management layer requirements, they might seem vague. It's because they're trying to include both of these use cases in all the situations. You might say, I've got an HA pair gateways for these images, for these hosts, and I've got a fleet of ADNN egress gateways that these other hosts all see, and they don't use ANA. But that should be manageable.
Yeah, I think the rest of the discussion probably stays the same.
I hope so. That's what we think we have accomplished here, is at least we have a framework that includes everything. So
right.
Now we just need some code in that framework.
Exactly.
That's awesome. Thanks. That was
Sure.
So that's
Is there any point? Sorry. Is there any point where I should upload these slides? So.
Oh, how do we do that on Etherpad? Is that even possible?
I don't know.
Can you make an attachment?
Not on Etherpad, no. If you just put them on like Google Slides or something and make it public, you can put the URL in there.
Okay, that I can do.
Make it a PDF or something?
Yeah.
Whatever, yeah. Yep. Cool. Okay. Well, that answers my question. I mean, it seems like the real question is like, who's writing code at this point.
Yeah, so obviously some of the SPDK things, it makes sense for, Intel to be doing, like, let's fix the RBDB dev, let's figure out, whether what is the best path towards some kind of LUN masking. And I'm glad Jonas had these slides because that was the thing I was feeling like I needed to explain. The connection count is a problem, and it really hits ADNN. If we had basically these, if you do, your hardware probably like some reasonable number of QPs, like 128. It may fall over dead if you wanted to have 4,000 of them. Some of them just can't get there. So you really got to pay attention to that. If you scroll back through the action items, there had been a request or an offer or some combination to get an SPDK person from Intel to attend this meeting occasionally, like maybe next week, and tell us about what obstacles we're likely to hit trying to do LUN masking, the namespace set type thing versus multiple subsystems. And I have provisional buy-in to do that. We just need to commit to a date. And to that end, I was going to encourage us all to review the list of SPDK issues in the RBD NVMeOF target Etherpad, which I think the link has already been posted to the chat, right? Oops, I clicked on the wrong thing. RBD, no, it's
the last
this
link
one. No, it's the one that ends in target. That one. So this one basically started out as an explanation of what the SPD target would look like. I just walked through how to configure in the POC we did, but it also has at the top a list of issues or questions about SPDK. So if we could all review that list and make sure everything you're wondering about SPDK or every question we think we have outstanding that isn't answered is on that list, that for me is in light blue under needed enhancements, then I can invite Jim or Ben or both to come and speak to that next week, or if they're not available, I'll let you know which day they can actually make it. Is that good enough? Will that address our?
I think so. I mean, the big question in my mind is how the C-star reactor and the Boost ASIO reactor relate, and whether code written for the Boost ASIO reactor can be adapted or reused wholesale.
Yeah, that's something that might surprise them. I don't know if.
I don't know who the right person to ask is about that.
Yeah, I'll dig around some more. I have a note that you asked about that. Honestly, that was like I said, something we plan to kind of deal with later because it's not there yet, right? There's
no. But I just want to make sure. I mean, if I have to look into the future, I imagine what's going to happen is we're going to get all these pieces glued together, and we're going to get a gateway that we can stand up, and we're going to be disappointed by the performance. And the way forward there, I think, is going to be to get all the RBD client code running under the C-star reactor, same reactor that the target code is running. That's going to be where we want to end up. And so I'm wondering I just want to make sure that we have some reasonable confidence that we'll be able to take that last big step without a large rewrite.
Yeah, there was also early on in this discussion, there was talk about, wait, let me forget. Let's see, that was before this was a public meeting, so maybe I should send you an email about that. But there was an even deeper integration considered, and we haven't talked about it here. So, okay, so that's where we're at. And so what is the word on who's from Red Hat is going to, is Brett here?
Brett was here. Did he drop off?
He might have been the one that had
He was here. He dropped off.
Okay.
Yeah.
Should have asked us
we lost
earlier.
Brett.
Yeah.
So he'd be the guy that assigns resources, right?
Yeah.
I mean,
I think the net effect, though, that was going to be Greg, right? That Greg right now is our tentative person.
I'm doing the maintainer stuff that Jason was doing for a while at least, and we'll be learning things like that. But Jason mentioned trying to plug the Crimson Messenger in front of RBD to me, but we didn't talk about the technical bits of that at all. And I have no idea about your ASIO question.
But as far as the prototype NVMF gateway code that he put in the Git repo, that'd be that's a thing that needs to move forward too. Who can pick that up?
Yeah.
This is what usually happens. We recognize that it needs to be done, but unless we already know how to do it, we don't volunteer.
Yeah, I think we don't have an answer yet. It's my
right.
Yeah.
I guess that we need to. Yeah.
So that's the state then.
Yep.
And I guess we'll see next week or overtime. Oh yeah, way over. Sorry.
Yeah. Cool. Okay. Well, thank you. I understand more than I did before. That's good.
All right. See you all next week.
Thanks, guys. See you.
All right. Quick note: I actually will not be here next week, but.
Okay. Are you at the whole week or just for this meeting?
I'll be around for the CDMs I need to be in, but I'm taking vacation the first half.
Okay. Got it.
CDSs.
Cool.
CDSs sessions. Yeah.
All right. Sounds good.
Yeah.
Cool.
All right. Thanks all.